Nolan Chambers, and this is my final project for sports ethics, where I'm going to talk about my ethical philosophy and kind of how I look at the world from a perspective of sports and how that kind of also impacts my greater ethical framework and how I view the world from an ethical perspective as a whole. Um, so to start off here, this slide, I tried to choose a picture that shows catcher giving signs, and I thought that did a good job of kind of starting this off and looking at the way we started our conversation with the idea of just how gamesmanship and sportsmanship have an impact on what we do and the way we look at sports. And I'm definitely someone that is of the viewpoint that gamesmanship is okay and is encouraged, and I'm not someone that's by any means saying sportsmanship is bad. I certainly believe there's a place for that, and it's a necessity that there's good sports and that we're all doing that. But I think as competitors and someone that's extremely competitive, I think the way that I start my ethical framework in terms of sports is really just looking at being competitive and gaining that advantage however you can. And the way that I kind of reasoned with that and used the examples that I did was what if a pitcher's tipping signs or something and you can pick up on that during the game. I don't think that's cheating. I think that's should be allowed, and I think that's something that we should, I don't want to say encourage necessarily, but like it's something that it's going to happen. And if they're giving away the signals and you're doing it organically just by watching and studying, more power to you. I believe that's part of sports, and I think we should be doing whatever we can to get that slightest edge, like a NASCAR crew trying to, cut down this tenth of a second on a lap or hundredth of a second of a lap by adjusting something so small in the car that nobody would even notice, but it's something that helps them gain that competitive advantage. And I don't think we should be doing what the Astros did with cameras in center field. I think that certainly crosses a line. But I do think if as long as you're within the rules, I think the beginning of my kind of framework and how I started to think about this was competitiveness and just being that person that is so competitive and doing whatever they can to win, but still being within the rules. And kind of going off of that with the next portion of this, with as we moved into the class, we looked at just the idea of altruism and how that impacts us. And I think I was somebody that was of the belief that after thinking about it, like I kind of agreed that there's maybe not necessarily this idea that altruism is all encompassing and it's something that no matter what, we can be altruistic. I think underlying thoughts, no matter what, are going to be there of self fulfillment and kind of getting something out of being a good person. But I don't think that necessarily means we should stop helping people. Obviously, I think just because it makes you feel good, that's fine. I think we should allow that to happen and continue to help people and continue to help others and be the best version of ourselves that we can be. And I think when looking at the previous slide and how I explained my competitive nature and wanting to win at all costs within the rules, of course, I think there's a second part that's equally vital to how I look at things, and that would be this idea of being a good person and doing what I can to help others when I can and just be the best version of myself that I can be. And I think while being competitive and doing what you can within sports and certainly being respectful and a good sport at the same time, but using that gamesmanship, and I think within the rules of the game and on the field of play, that's a different story. And then combining that with being a good person and showing respect to other your teammates and integrity of the game by not cheating and extending that into your life away from the field, I think those become the two biggest, most vital pieces of my ethical framework and how I view the world in sports and otherwise. So then the next portion of this we started to look at was how violence plays a factor in sports. And as someone that played football for 10 years as an offensive lineman, I wasn't ever somebody that I felt was inherently violent, and I don't think I've continued on to become someone that is either, but I think there was something to be said for that. They always told you, as your coach was telling you, to take out your aggression on the defensive lineman and kind of impose your will and use that as motivation to get off the line first and make the hole for the running back to run through and things like that. And I think that goes hand in hand with the competitive nature as well as what I was just talking about being a good person and being a good sport and respectful. And I think there's a place on the field due to our biological nature of inherently having that aggression and some violence within us. And I think sports allows us to channel that in a appropriate manner and allows us to kind of have a place to release some of that aggression and anger, but not let it have long lasting impacts outside the game of the sport that we're playing. And I think there's certainly a place for that. And I believe that because of the fact that we are so competitive and aggression, and that's how I look at sports and just wanting to win, I think violence is inherently going to be a part of that, and I think that's okay. But I think it's also great that sports allows us to channel that and keep the rest of things kind of separate, and not allow us to be violent on the outside world, which is obviously not what anybody wants. So I think there is a place for that in sports, and I think it helps kind of separate the two worlds and allow us to be the best version of ourselves outside of sports and be good ambassadors as people and for the sport themselves, and then also allow us to show a little bit more aggression on the field. And going off of that, I think kind of it's so important that we just be the best versions of ourselves. And while I'm extremely competitive and I want to do everything I can to be the best version of myself, the best athlete, the best competitor, the best candidate for a job, the best employee, I think that goes hand in hand with this idea of hiring the best people for the job and being the best person for the job. And I'm certainly someone that believes that there's a place for diversity in all workplaces, and I think it's only a good thing. It's going to help us get better ideas and better people to bounce ideas off of with different viewpoints and things like that. And I don't think that's ever a bad thing under any circumstance, and I think it's really vital for a healthy workplace and a successful workplace. But I do believe that going off of what I've kind of built up here is that being the best version for the best person for the job and the best version of yourself is extremely vital and plays a huge role in the way I view the world ethically. And I don't necessarily think it is ethical to hire someone who's less qualified just because they fulfill something that we're missing in this workplace. I think diversity is great, it's needed, and I think it certainly plays a role. And I just think that it can happen organically. And ultimately, if we hire the best people for the job and the people that are doing everything they can to set themselves apart, I think that portion of it will kind of take care of itself organically. And I think that's something that I learned along this process and that I've taken into account is just that I want to be the best version of myself and I want the best people to get the jobs that they deserve and the best people to help elevate the workforce as a whole of whatever society or group that we're talking about. And just the best people are going to elevate you more, and that diversity is going to come organically when we hire the best people for the job. Then kind of starting to wrap things up here, I think going off of that, I don't think there's any place for cheating in sports. And I think being a good person and doing what's in your power to be the best version of yourself and make good decisions and be a good sport, but also look to push the envelope and do what you can to find the loopholes or do what you can to be the best version of yourself and make that extra little gain that helps push your team or your group at work or whatever it may be over the edge. I think there's no place for doping and cheating in sports. And I think, like I've said, kind of building up to this, that's where I draw the line. And I don't think there's any reason for that to be okay. And kind of wrapping that up here as we finish up is just that goes back to my framework as a whole. I believe in sportsmanship, of course, but I also believe in gamesmanship and pushing to innovate and shave time off of your lap as a sprinter or as a driver, or do the little things you can to pick up on what play the quarterback's about to call based on the audible and watching the film that he's done throughout the year. I think all of that's more than okay. But I think once you cross the line of cheating and breaking the rule, you lose the integrity of the game and the respect of your peers. And I think that's where I draw the line. And at that point, I question whether or not you are a good person. And I don't want to say that because people cheat for a variety of reasons. And it doesn't necessarily make them bad people, but it certainly means their views are compromised. And I don't believe in what they believe. So with that said, I think that kind of wraps up my personal ethical views and just ultimately I believe in being the best version of yourself and being a good person, but also being extremely competitive. And yeah, I would say that's overall how I would wrap up what I believe from an ethical viewpoint in sports. Thank you.